Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/BrianEDenton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated.
Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 220. Chapter 220. Napoleon's generals, Davout, Ney, and Murat, who were near that region of fire and sometimes even entered it, repeatedly led into it huge masses of well-ordered troops. But contrary to what had always happened in their former battles, instead of the news they expected of the enemy's flight, these orderly masses returned thence as disorganized and terrified mobs. The generals reformed them, but their numbers constantly decreased. In the middle of the day, Murat sent his adjutant to Napoleon to demand reinforcements. Napoleon sat at the foot of the knoll, drinking punch, when Murat's adjutant galloped up with an assurance that the Russians would be routed, if His Majesty would let him have another division. "Reinforcements?" said Napoleon, in a tone of stern surprise, looking at the adjutant, a handsome lad with long black curls arranged like Murat's own, as though he did not understand his words. "Reinforcements?" thought Napoleon to himself. "How can they need reinforcements when they already have half the army directed against a weak, unentrenched Russian wing?" "Tell the King of Naples," said he sternly, "that it is not yet noon, and I don't see my chessboard clearly. Go." The handsome boy adjutant, with his long hair, sighed deeply without removing his hand from his hat, and galloped back to where men were being slaughtered. Napoleon rose, and having summoned Caulaincourt and Berthier, began talking to them about matters unconnected with the battle. In the midst of this conversation, which was beginning to interest Napoleon, Berthier's eyes turned to look at a general with the suite, who was galloping toward the knoll on a lathering horse. It was Belliard. Having dismounted, he went up to the emperor with rapid strides, and in a loud voice began boldly demonstrating the necessity of sending reinforcements. He swore on his honor that the Russians were lost if the emperor would give him another division. Napoleon shrugged his shoulders and continued to pace up and down without replying. Belliard began talking loudly and eagerly to the general of the suite around him. "You are very fiery, Belliard," said Napoleon when he came up again to the general. "In the heat of a battle it is easy to make a mistake. Go and have another look, and then come back to me." Before Belliard was out of sight, a messenger from another part of the battlefield galloped up. "Now then, what do you want?" asked Napoleon, in the tone of a man irritated at being constantly disturbed. "Sire, the prince," began the adjutant. "Asked for reinforcements?" said Napoleon with an angry gesture. The adjutant bent his head affirmatively and began to report, but the emperor turned from him, took a couple of steps, stopped, came back, and called Berthier. "We must give reserves," he said, moving his arms slightly apart. "Who do you think should be sent there?" he asked of Berthier, whom he subsequently termed "that gosling I have made an eagle." "Send Claparède's division, sire," replied Berthier, who knew all the divisions, regiments, battalions by heart. Napoleon nodded assent. The adjutant galloped up to Claparède's division, and a few minutes later the young guards stationed behind the knoll moved forward. Napoleon gazed silently in that direction. "No," he suddenly said to Berthier, "I can't say Claparède. Send Friant's division." Though there was no advantage in sending Friant's division instead of Claparède's, and even an obvious inconvenience and delay in stopping Claparède's and sending Friant now, the order was carried out exactly. Napoleon did not notice that in regard to his army he was playing the part of a doctor who hinders by his medicines, a role he so justly understood and condemned. Friant's division disappeared as the others had done into the smoke of the battlefield. From all sides, adjutants continued to arrive at a gallop, and as if by agreement, they all said the same thing. They all asked for reinforcements, and all said that the Russians were holding their positions and maintaining a hellish fire under which the French army was melting away. Napoleon sat on a camp stool, wrapped in thought. Monsieur de Bassier, the man so fond of travel, having fasted since morning, came up to the emperor and ventured respectfully to suggest lunch to his majesty. "I hope I may now congratulate your majesty on a victory," said he. Napoleon silently shook his head in negation. Assuming the negation to refer only to the victory and not to the lunch, Monsieur d'Abussy ventured with respectful jocularity to remark that there is no reason for not having lunch when one can get it. "Go away!" exclaimed Napoleon suddenly and morosely, and turned aside. A beatific smile of regret, repentance, and ecstasy beamed on Monsieur de Beaussier's face, and he glided away to the other generals. Napoleon was experiencing a feeling of depression like that of an ever-lucky gambler who, after recklessly flinging money about and always winning, suddenly, just when he has calculated all the chances of the game, finds that the more he considers his play, the more surely he loses. His troops were the same, his generals the same preparations had been made, the same dispositions, and the same proclamation courte et énergique. He himself was still the same. He knew that, and knew that he was now even more experienced and skillful than before. Even the enemy was the same as at Austerlitz and Friedland, yet the terrible stroke of his arm had supernaturally become impotent. All the old methods that had been unfailingly crowned with success, the concentration of batteries on one point, an attack by reserves to break the enemy's line, and a cavalry attack by the men of iron. All these methods had already been employed, yet not only was there no victory, but from all sides came the same news of generals killed and wounded, of reinforcements needed, of the impossibility of driving back the Russians, and of disorganization among his own troops. Formerly, after he had given 2 or 3 orders and uttered a few phrases, marshals and adjutants came galloping up with congratulations and happy faces, announcing the trophies taken, the corps of prisoners, bundles of enemy eagles and standards, cannon and stores, and Marat had only begged leave to loose the cavalry to gather in the baggage wagons. So it had been at Lodi, Marengo, Arcola, Jena, Austerlitz, Wagram, and so on. But now something strange was happening to his troops. Despite news of the capture of the Fletches, Napoleon saw that this was not the same, not at all the same, as what had happened in his former battles. He saw that what he was feeling was felt by all the men about him experienced in the art of war. All their faces looked dejected, and they all shunned one another's eyes. Only Dubussy could fail to grasp the meaning of what was happening. But Napoleon, with his long experience of war, well knew the meaning of a battle not gained by the attacking side in 8 hours, after all efforts had been expended. He knew that it was a lost battle, and that the least accident might now, with the fight balanced on such a strained center, destroy him and his army. When he ran his mind over the whole of this strange Russian campaign, in which not one battle had been won, and in which not a flag or cannon or army corps had been captured in 2 months, when he looked at the concealed depression on the faces around him and heard reports of the Russians still holding their ground, a terrible feeling like a nightmare took possession of him, and all the unlucky accidents that might destroy him occurred to his mind. The Russians might fall back on his left wing, might break through his center. He himself might be killed by a stray cannonball. All this was possible. In former battles, he had only considered the possibilities of success, but now innumerable unlucky chances presented themselves, and he expected them all. Yes, it was like a dream in which a man fancies that a ruffian is coming to attack him, and raises his arm to strike that ruffian a terrible blow which he knows should annihilate him, but then feels that his arm drops powerless and limp like a rag, and the horror of unavoidable destruction seizes him in his helplessness. The news that the Russians were attacking the left flank of the French army aroused that horror in Napoleon. He sat silently on a camp stool below the knoll, his head bowed and his elbows on his knees. Berthier approached and suggested that they should ride along the line to ascertain the position of affairs. What do you say?" asked Napoleon. Yes, tell them to bring me my horse." He mounted and rode towards Smirnovsk. Amid the powder smoke, slowly dispersing over the whole space to which Napoleon rode, horses and men were lying in pools of blood, singly or in heaps. Neither Napoleon nor any of his generals had ever before seen such horrors, or so many slain in such a small area. The roar of guns, that had not ceased for 10 hours, wearied the ear, and gave a peculiar significance to the spectacle, as music does to tableaux vivants. Napoleon rode up the high ground at Smirnovsk, and through the smoke saw ranks of men in uniforms of a color unfamiliar to him. They were Russians. The Russians stood in serried ranks behind Smirnov village and its knoll, and their guns boomed incessantly along their line and sent forth clouds of smoke. It was no longer a battle. It was a continuous slaughter, which could be of no avail either to the French or to the Russians. Napoleon stopped his horse and again fell into a reverie from which Berthier had aroused him. He could not stop what was going on before him and around him, and was supposed to be directed by him and to depend on him. And from its lack of success, this affair, for the first time, seemed to him unnecessary and horrible. One of the generals rode up to Napoleon and ventured to offer to lead the old guard into action. Ney and Berthier, standing near Napoleon, exchanged looks and smiled contemptuously at this general's senseless offer. Napoleon bowed his head and remained silent for a long time. "At 800 leagues from France, I will not have my guard destroyed," he said, and turning his horse, he rode back to Shevárdino. All right, that concludes my reading of chapter 220. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, Day 220, War and Economics. In September of 1945, the American Economic Review published a paper called The Uses of Knowledge in Society by Friedrich Hayek. In that paper, Hayek argues against the idea of a centrally planned economy. He advocates instead for decentralized economic planning with decision-making divided among many individuals. Napoleon would have benefited greatly, possibly bringing the Battle of Borodino to a more decisive and swift end, if only he could have somehow read, understood, and applied the lessons of Hayek's paper. Napoleon, as we have seen, is a consummate central planner. We've witnessed many times over now his stubborn attachment to his blueprints for battle. His belief seems to be that war is best approached with exacting scientific precision. At one point in today's chapter, he even refers to the battlefield as a chessboard. Chess, however, is composed of inanimate wood pieces and features a set of rules of play. It can therefore be played with mere logic. Not so with the messy organic nature of warfare, composed as it is by emotionally charged humans with unknowable urges and compulsions. In treating the battle as a game of chess, Napoleon is engaging, as Hayek has it, in, quote, an erroneous transfer to social phenomena of the habits of thought we have developed in dealing with the phenomena of nature, end quote. This mistake leads Napoleon to disregard the request of his generals to send in reinforcements. Napoleon instead adopts the central planner's top-down management style rather than Hayek's bottom-up proposal. When Murat gallops up to Napoleon and requests that reinforcements be sent in, Napoleon rejects this idea, presumably because it doesn't comport with his design for the battle. Keep in mind, as we learned yesterday, that Napoleon cannot clearly see the battle. His view is obscured by the fog of war. Murat, on the other hand, is right there in the thick of it. Hayek's warning about the problems of a centrally planned economy are apropos here. The knowledge of the circumstances of which we must make use never exists in concentrated or integrated form, Hayek writes, but solely as the dispersed bits of incomplete and frequently contradictory knowledge which all the separate individuals possess. Hayek also argues that rapid change in circumstances of time and place in the economy demands an equally rapid adaptation to such changes. Therefore, the ultimate decisions must be left to the people who are familiar with these circumstances, who know directly of the relevant changes and of the resources immediately available to them. In terms of the Battle of Borodino, the actors who are familiar with the circumstances are the French generals on the ground, and more so, the soldiers themselves, rather than Napoleon. Napoleon, nevertheless, ignores his general's plea for reinforcements. After refusing Murat, he likewise ignores Belliard. When he finally does comprehend the need for reinforcements, he refuses the advice of Berthier, who knew all the divisions, regiments, and battalions by heart, and instead sends in another division of his own choosing. Hayek concludes his essay by noting that prices set locally in an open, competitive market serve as bits of information, allowing a decentralized planning apparatus to articulate the dispersed hidden data of the economy to otherwise ignorant market participants. To abandon this organic emergent system in favor of a command-oriented central pricing board has historically resulted in terrible outcomes. Likewise, Napoleon's refusal to make use of the dispersed knowledge of his generals on the ground leads to a gruesome battlefield, the likes of which neither he nor his generals have ever seen. Let's not be Napoleon. Let us instead make use of the prices available to us before we make decisions. In life, those with the most intimate knowledge are those who have come before. Fortunately for us, there are many who have come before. Many of them have left records of their experiences and the lessons they have learned. While it doesn't cost much to listen to them, the price of disregarding their counsel is dear indeed. Daily meditation. The only people really at leisure are those who take time for philosophy. They alone really live. It is not their lifetime alone, of which they are careful stewards. They annex every age to their own and exploit all the years that have gone before. Seneca, on the shortness of life. So that concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 220. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for listening today. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation at PayPal. The links to all that are down below in the show notes. Tomorrow, we will be reading and reflecting on chapter 221 of War and Peace. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.